Okay, so today, we're diving into a quote that really makes you think. Human obsession with purpose is merely a way to avoid the absurdity of existence. This idea, which sounds a lot like something surrealist writers such as Nikolai Gogol might have mused about, isn't just a deep philosophical thought. It's actually a sharp tool that carves away at the very core of how we live our lives now. It brings up an uncomfortable question. Is chasing after life's purpose a brave stand we take, or is it just a fancy trick we play on ourselves to avoid the cold, quiet truth that the universe might not care about us at all? If there's no grand plan for us, if our lives aren't part of some big story written by destiny, then is purpose something real we find, or just a nice story we make up to feel better? Let's begin with the common understanding of purpose. A guiding principle, a direction that gives meaning to our actions. It is what inspires someone to wake before sunrise, work through pain, endure boredom, or sacrifice comfort. It is enshrined in everything from corporate mission statements to spiritual vows. For many, purpose is life's North Star, without which days feel aimless and nights restless. But lurking beneath its reassuring glow is a deeper psychological hunger. The desire for control in a chaotic world, the yearning for coherence in a universe that offers none. This craving is not new. Ancient myths, medieval religions, and modern self-help books all point toward a narrative structure. Life must mean something, otherwise why suffer at all? Enter the philosophy of the absurd, rooted in existentialist thought, especially in the works of Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre. Absurdism posits that life has no inherent meaning, and the universe remains indifferent to our hopes and fears. The absurd is not the same as despair. It is a confrontation between the human need for meaning and the silent refusal of the cosmos to provide it. We ask why, and the universe responds with an echo. For Camus, the first step toward authenticity is not to fabricate meaning where none exists, but to embrace this contradiction, to live fully and honestly in the face of meaninglessness. This is where purpose begins to show its double edge. On one side, it organizes our time, our relationships, and our sense of self. On the other, it may serve as an escape hatch from the terror of existing without an external script. When we pursue purpose without questioning it, we risk using it as a psychological narcotic, a story we repeat to ourselves not because it is true, but because silence is too frightening to bear. We want life to be a novel with a plot twist, not a blank page. But perhaps the blank page is the truth, and the Stoic accepts it. Stoic philosophy, originating with Zeno of Citium and later refined by thinkers like Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, offers a calm and uncompromising response to this existential dilemma. Rather than denying chaos, the Stoic welcomes it. Rather than demanding answers, the Stoic sharpens questions. In the Stoic worldview, there are only two categories of things, those within our control and those outside it. Fame, fortune, health, other people's opinions, even death itself, all lie beyond the circle of mastery. Only our judgments, choices, and responses are truly ours. From this foundation arises a key insight. To cling to an externally defined purpose is to live in bondage. The Stoic does not reject purpose entirely but reframes it. Instead of treating it as a final answer, the Stoic sees it as a practice, a dynamic, moment-to-moment discipline. Life does not require a grand arc to be worthwhile. It requires presence, clarity, and virtue. The wise person, says Marcus Aurelius, acts not for outcomes, but because right action is its own reward. To illustrate this, imagine a parable. A man hears of a hidden treasure buried in a distant land. He leaves his home, travels across deserts, mountains, and oceans, spending decades in pursuit. Eventually, weary and empty-handed, he returns, only to discover that beneath the floorboards of his childhood home was the very jewel he sought. This story, like many ancient myths, is not about geography. It is about attention. The outward journey was a distraction. What he needed was already with him. This is the Stoic insight. We often chase meaning externally, blind to the riches we already possess internally. Of course, the Stoics are not nihilists. They do not promote inaction or apathy. On the contrary, Stoicism is a philosophy of rigorous discipline and moral purpose, but it distinguishes between goals and dependencies. You may strive to write a book, raise a child, build a community, but your serenity must not hinge on success or failure. Goals are to be pursued, not worshipped. As Epictetus reminds us, remember, you are an actor in a play the author has written. Whether your role is short or long, what matters is how well you perform. This reversal of modern thinking is profound. Today, purpose is often treated as a destination. Without it, we are told, life is meaningless. But when purpose becomes too central, it enslaves us. It tells us we are only valuable if we fulfill a mission. When that mission fails or disappears, so does our sense of self. The Stoic rejects this. You are not your job, your legacy, or your narrative arc. You are your character, your discernment, your ability to navigate each moment with equanimity. Moreover, the more we chase purpose, the more we may miss the present. We become so preoccupied with meaning that we forget to live. Days pass in planning, striving, achieving, until we look up and realize we've never truly arrived. The irony is that in our hunger for purpose, we may starve the soul of the only nourishment it ever needed: simple, attentive being. In a world with no pre-written map, perhaps what we need is not a destination, but a compass, a way to steer, not a place to reach. We do not control the wind, but we can adjust our sails. Seneca once said, "There is no favorable wind for the sailor who does not know his destination." But perhaps the greater wisdom is this: no wind is favorable or unfavorable in itself. It simply is. The Stoic, unlike the sailor searching for land, learns to love the sea for what it is: wild, uncertain, alive. So let us ask not what is my purpose, but what kind of person do I become in the absence of one? Can I be kind without reason? Can I act justly without reward? Can I endure hardship without promise of redemption? If yes, then we are close to the heart of Stoic wisdom, a freedom not from suffering but from illusion. So let's go deeper into the Stoic framework. If we've already peeled back the curtain on the tension between humanity's obsession with purpose and the absurdity of existence, then now we begin to unroll the Stoic scroll in response. At the heart of it is eudaimonia, a slippery, ancient word that might just hold the key to the most radical reinterpretation of purpose you've ever encountered. But before we go there, let's set aside the usual ambitions: building a legacy, leaving a mark, or chasing happiness like it's a golden snitch. The Stoics offer something sturdier, something that doesn't vanish when life doesn't go your way. In Stoicism, eudaimonia isn't a trophy you win after climbing some metaphorical mountain. It's not a goal at all in the conventional sense. It's a way of being, a state of flourishing that arises when you live in accordance with reason and virtue. The Greek root of the word translates roughly to being on good terms with your inner demon, your guiding spirit. And that's key. This kind of flourishing isn't dependent on external validation, material success, or even health. It's rooted in arete, excellence in character. Where modern life tells you to build a resume and check off achievements, Stoicism whispers, develop integrity. Where consumer society urges you to find purpose in prestige or productivity, the Stoics direct you inward. What matters is not what happens to you, but how you respond to it, wisely, virtuously, with self-control. Epictetus famously said, "Some things are up to us and some are not." This deceptively simple statement underpins the entire architecture of Stoic ethics. External goals, money, fame, recognition, aren't inherently wrong, but they're unstable. They lie outside the scope of your full control. Setbacks, betrayals, recessions, pandemics, these are the wild cards the universe throws in. But your judgments, intentions, and choices, those are yours. Herein lies the true Stoic purpose, not to achieve some grand external mission, but to practice virtue within whatever circumstances arise. The goal is to live in agreement with nature, which, in the Stoic view, means using your rational capacity to align with the order of the cosmos. This is not a retreat from responsibility. It's a redirection of responsibility. Much has been misunderstood about the Stoic emotional ideal. Apatheia, for instance, is often misread as apathy, but the Stoic concept is closer to emotional clarity or peace of mind. It's not that you don't feel, it's that you are no longer ruled by unhealthy passions like greed, envy, or despair. Phlegma, a tranquil, even-tempered composure, is its companion. When your purpose becomes entangled with outcomes you cannot control, disappointment becomes inevitable. The job you didn't get, the partner who left, the project that failed. But if you reframe your purpose not as success, but as right action, acting with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline, then your sense of meaning becomes invulnerable. Imagine you're a captain steering a ship down a vast, unpredictable river. The currents are strong, the weather shifts, and you can't see around the next bend. You don't control the river, but you can set your sail, adjust your rudder, and decide how to react to the storm. This is Stoicism in motion, navigating life not by controlling the world, but by mastering your own ship, your reason, values, and choices. It's easy to say, follow your purpose, when everything is going well. It's much harder, and more necessary, when everything falls apart. And that's where the Stoic strength lies. It teaches that the good life is not conditional on good fortune. Here's where Stoicism offers its boldest thesis. Virtue is sufficient for happiness. Marcus Aurelius didn't need a 5-year plan or a startup pitch deck to find meaning. For him, being just, disciplined, and rational was enough. This flies in the face of nearly every motivational poster you've ever seen. To the Stoics, action done with excellence, whether or not anyone sees or rewards it, is intrinsically fulfilling. If you act with virtue and integrity in a single moment, you have lived well in that moment. Stack enough of those moments together, and you've lived a meaningful life. No final goal necessary, no grand revelation required, just consistent, virtuous engagement with reality. But what if your dream collapses? What if the purpose that once drove you suddenly vanishes? Enter premeditatio malorum, the Stoic practice of mentally rehearsing adversity. Far from pessimism, this exercise strengthens your resilience. It's a form of cognitive immunization, preparing the soul for loss, failure, or change by acknowledging their inevitability. If you envision the loss of your goal, and you imagine responding to it with grace, then the fear it holds over you weakens. You no longer treat your purpose as a condition for peace, but as an opportunity to practice virtue. When you lose something external, you haven't lost yourself. So how do the Stoics resolve the tension between having a purpose and being distracted by one? The answer lies in detachment, not from action, but from outcome. You can aim for excellence in your work, your relationships, your craft, but you don't need success to feel complete. The act of striving, if done with virtue, is already meaningful. This subtle shift redefines purpose. It's not a fixed destination or narrative you have to fulfill. It's the quality of your presence, your engagement, your integrity. You become less concerned with finding your purpose and more committed to living purposefully. Think of life like climbing a mountain that has no summit. You may never arrive in the traditional sense, but every step, every decision to move forward with courage and wisdom is the purpose. You're not waiting for some future moment to bestow meaning on your life. You're cultivating it through daily practice. To live as a Stoic is to shift from outcome dependence to process devotion. You do the right thing not because it guarantees a reward, but because it's right. And that internal consistency, the harmony between values and actions, is the closest thing to real peace. Of course, Stoicism is not alone in seeking purpose beyond externals. Buddhism emphasizes detachment from desire. Existentialism urges the individual to create their own meaning. But where existentialism often leans into anguish and Buddhism dissolves the self entirely, Stoicism offers a middle path. You remain engaged with the world, even as you remain inwardly sovereign. Stoicism doesn't deny suffering. It trains you to stand inside it with clarity. It doesn't promise transcendence. It offers endurance. And it doesn't require belief in a cosmic plan. It merely invites you to live well within the chaos. In the end, eudaimonia is not something you find. It's something you practice. It's not an end state, but a continual discipline, a series of choices made in alignment with reason, virtue, and acceptance. You don't need to know where life will lead. You just need a compass that always points true. That compass is virtue. And with it, you don't need a purpose to feel alive. You are your purpose. In every moment you choose to live according to your highest principles. By now you've likely begun to see the pattern. The more tightly you cling to a singular cosmic purpose, the more the universe seems to shrug in response. And so, what next? Do you spiral into nihilism? Rage against the absurd? The Stoics offer neither despair nor denial. Instead, they hand you something far more unsettling and empowering. The idea that peace lies not in controlling fate, but in loving it. Welcome to Amor Fati, the radical Stoic doctrine of embracing everything, including chaos, chance, and catastrophe, as integral to your life's unfolding. Let's first take a deeper look at absurdity. In the modern philosophical tradition, Albert Camus famously wrestled with this concept, asking whether life's lack of intrinsic meaning makes it unlivable. He concluded, no, but only if we revolt against the absurd and live with conscious defiance. The Stoics, centuries earlier, reached a similarly defiant stance, but through acceptance rather than rebellion. Absurdity to a Stoic isn't a cause for panic. It's a mirror showing you the limits of control and the vastness of the unknown. Life is not ordered for your convenience. The weather doesn't care if you have a picnic planned. Death, too, arrives on its own schedule. And yet Stoicism says, breathe it in and say yes. That brings us to memento mori. Remember you will die. This practice, as grim as it may seem, isn't morbid. It's liberating. Seneca, in his letters, advised contemplating death regularly, not to evoke fear but to strip it of its power. If death is the end for everyone, then the game changes. What matters isn't how long you live or what grand purpose you achieve, but how virtuously and fully you live today. Marcus Aurelius put it bluntly, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Memento mori prepares the ground for amor fati, the love of fate. Not just tolerance, not passive resignation, love. This is the Stoic upgrade. It asks, can you welcome not only the good but the bad? Can you find something sacred in the heartbreak, the illness, the job loss? Amor fati is not masochism. It's the recognition that even pain belongs. If the universe is a web of causes and effects far beyond your grasp, then whatever reaches you is not an error. It's an invitation to engage with life more deeply, not on your terms, but on its own. Consider the metaphor of the potter. The Stoics use this image to explain human resilience. A potter does not curse the nature of clay. He studies it, works with its flaws, learns how it stretches when it cracks, and what temperature it needs to transform. In the same way, Stoicism teaches that you are not here to mold reality to your liking. You are here to shape yourself within the conditions you are given. Destiny, in this framework, is not a prison, it's raw material. To understand the Stoic courage in facing absurdity, it's useful to contrast it briefly with existentialism. Camus and Sartre acknowledged the absurd but emphasized human freedom to define one's own values. Stoicism, while agreeing that meaning is not found in the external world, turns inward with a stricter discipline. It doesn't seek to invent new values but to align with nature's logic, reason, virtue, and the acceptance of impermanence. In existentialism, the individual shouts into the void. In Stoicism, the individual listens to the silence and responds with serenity. But, can such detachment coexist with passion and purpose? The answer is yes, if those passions are cultivated with the awareness that they might not come to fruition. That's the paradox. You can work tirelessly, love deeply, and act with conviction, while knowing none of it is guaranteed to last. In fact, that's what makes it meaningful. As Epictetus said, don't seek for things to happen the way you want them to. Rather, wish that what happens happen the way it does. Then you will be happy. This reorientation is where the illusion of external purpose begins to dissolve. You're no longer clinging to a narrative that the world owes you clarity, fairness, or reward. You're not chasing an ultimate destination to make everything else worthwhile. Instead, you're seeing every moment, no matter how strange or difficult, as sufficient in itself. You may not understand the grand design, but you begin to trust that responding to each moment with integrity is enough. That brings us to the liberation buried in absurdity. Most people fear that if life is absurd, then nothing matters. But the Stoics turn this on its head. If life is absurd, then you are free. Free to stop measuring yourself against arbitrary standards. Free to stop pretending there's one right path. Free to stop delaying your peace until some external checkbox is marked. You are free to live in accordance with reason and virtue right now. You don't need the universe to validate you. Amor fati shifts the emphasis from what should happen to what is happening. And once you shift that focus, something extraordinary happens. You start paying attention. You listen more closely. You appreciate more quietly. You engage more humbly. You stop asking life to justify itself and start showing up for it instead. There's a curious strength in this kind of surrender. It's not defeatist, it's resilient. Because when you stop resisting what is, you conserve energy for responding wisely. This is the difference between a person tossed by the waves and one who learns to float. The Stoics were not advocating apathy. They were advocating alignment. The river is going to flow regardless. You might as well learn to swim. And so we return to the treasure you've been carrying all along, your own agency. Not control over the cosmos, but control over how you meet the cosmos. With equanimity, with reason, with grace. When external goals vanish or collapse, you remain. You do not vanish with them. You are more than your ambitions, more than your titles, more than your plans. You are the potter, not the clay. You are the swimmer, not the tide. This perhaps is the deepest meaning of amor fati, not a love of fate in the romantic sense, but in the realist's embrace of reality. Not the fantasy of life working out, but the dignity of working with life as it is. In doing so, you become undistracted, undeterred, and unshaken, not because the world is kind, but because your spirit is strong. And finally, maybe this is what meaning looks like when stripped of illusions. Not a grand, glittering mission, but the quiet confidence of knowing that you've said yes to life, wholly and without conditions. The absurd doesn't vanish, but it softens, and in its place a strange serenity arises. You've stopped wrestling the current, you've learned to flow, you've seen the horizon bend, you've watched meaning stretch and collapse, like smoke from a candle snuffed too soon. By now, you've stared long enough into the absurd to know it doesn't blink. And yet, you're still here, breathing, thinking, wondering what to do with this strange inheritance called life. That's when the Stoics hand you one final gift, not a solution to the absurd, but a stronghold against its storms. They call it the inner citadel. Your mind, your reason, your will, untouchable by fate, immune to fortune. Let's not mistake this for escapism. The Stoics weren't carving out a mental hideaway to avoid pain. No, this inner citadel isn't a refuge from reality. It's the foundation for engaging with it on sturdier terms. Life will break things. It may break you, but it cannot reach your judgment unless you open the gate. If you are distressed by anything external, Marcus Aurelius reminds you, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. There it is again, the Stoic hinge. Your power lies not in what happens, but in how you interpret what happens. Picture a world on fire. Perhaps it's literal, war, collapse, catastrophe. Or maybe it's quieter, the death of someone you love, the loss of your identity, the unbearable realization that life won't go how you hoped. The absurd comes in many costumes, but no matter its form, the Stoic stance remains the same. Return to what is yours, your reasoned choice, your core values, your integrity. There's a kind of armor in that. Not the armor of denial or delusion, but of clarity. You begin to see where the world ends and where you begin. Nowhere is this more powerfully illustrated than in the life of Epictetus. Born into slavery, crippled by a master's violence, he still taught that no one could harm the part of him that mattered most. His body could be chained, but his mind, untouchable. That's the inner citadel, not an abstract ideal, but a lived defiance. Even in chains, Epictetus said, "You may fetter my leg, but my will not even Zeus himself can overpower." This doesn't mean Stoicism encourages stoic silence in the face of injustice. On the contrary, it demands action, only that the action be grounded in virtue, not vengeance. That's the critical difference. You don't act to control the world. You act because virtue requires it. The outcome may be absurd, may be tragic, may even erase your efforts. But you act anyway, not for reward, but because your reason tells you it is right. Here we glimpse how Stoicism escapes both naive optimism and hopeless nihilism. It doesn't promise that virtue will prevail. It doesn't assume the universe will reward moral clarity. What it insists upon is this: even if the world burns, you can still choose who you are within the fire. And that choice is everything. It is the only thing. There's something terrifyingly free about this. No one to blame, no external goal to cling to. You are left with yourself, raw and undecorated. For many, that's unbearable. But for the Stoic, it is pure liberation. You are no longer enslaved to the world's chaos. You are a participant, yes, but on your terms. If the absurdity of existence renders all outcomes unstable, then the stability must come from within. The absurd, then, is not a wall, it's a mirror. You look into it and see your expectations crumble. But behind them something else appears: resilience, dignity, stillness. You are not the sum of your circumstances. You are the shape you take in response to them. The absurd may laugh at your plans, but it cannot mock your choices. Only you can do that. This is what the Stoics mean when they speak of freedom. Not political freedom, not economic mobility, but moral autonomy. You choose what to assent to. You choose how to carry suffering. You choose how to walk through the absurd without flinching or folding. You may grieve. You may stagger. But inside, something remains upright. Not unfeeling, but unbroken. Think of the Stoic mind as a lighthouse. It doesn't stop the storm, but it stands through it. You cannot change the tide, but you can keep the lamp lit. This isn't a metaphor for avoidance. It's an image of service. The lighthouse serves by staying lit. The Stoic serves by staying true. And yet, here's the twist. The inner citadel doesn't isolate you. It connects you. Once you stop demanding that others complete you, or that life deliver some ultimate justice, you become more capable of love, compassion, and presence. Why? Because you're no longer afraid. When you don't need the world to make sense, you can finally meet it where it is. That includes people. You forgive more. You judge less. You listen longer. You stop trying to convert the moment into something else. You just live it. The absurd is still there. It always will be. But now it's not the enemy. It's the background noise to a deeper music. The music of your own values, played quietly but consistently, no matter the chaos outside. This is not apathy. It is composure. You are no longer begging the universe for meaning. You're making meaning through how you stand, speak, and act. In that stance, absurdity loses its sting. So when the next collapse comes, because it will, you'll feel the tremor, yes. But you won't shatter. You'll return once more to the citadel. You'll sit with your thoughts. You'll weigh your options. And then you'll act, not because the world makes sense, but because you do. And that, the Stoics would say, is enough. So now you stand on the edge of everything. You've walked through paradoxes, sat with discomfort, and learned how not to flinch when the absurd stares back. You've built your citadel. You've watched the storm. And still, one last question lingers like the final note of a song that won't resolve. What happens when even the citadel isn't enough? What do you do when control slips completely, when reason offers no shelter, and virtue feels like a candle flickering in a vacuum? Here's where Stoicism offers its most paradoxical wisdom. Let go. Not in despair, not in resignation, but in grace. To let go for a Stoic is not to stop caring, it's to stop clutching. You are not the architect of the universe. You do not control the winds or the tides or the whims of the gods, but you do control the way you sail. And sometimes sailing means loosening your grip on the wheel and trusting the skill you've cultivated through storms past. This final Stoic insight doesn't shout, it whispers. There's no crescendo, no blazing victory, just a quiet decision to keep living well in a world that owes you nothing. You're not letting go because you've given up. You're letting go because you finally realized you were never in charge of the tide, only of your oar. In this final chapter of Stoic wisdom, there is no dramatic resolution. There's no triumphant finale where everything clicks and meaning is handed to you like a trophy. There is only you and your daily decision to stand in clarity, not certainty. To stop demanding coherence from a world that never promised it. To keep showing up, even when applause fades and the spotlight dies. It sounds simple. It is not. Because you are a creature of meaning. Addicted to stories, hungry for resolution. You want the plot to tie itself together, the villains to fall, the arc to land. But life isn't a screenplay, it's a sea with no script. The only rhythm that endures is the one you write with your choices, moment by moment, heartbeat by heartbeat. So the Stoic doesn't say, this happened for a reason. They say, this happened. Now how will I respond? And that's where you're finally free. You stop trying to extract a grand design from every heartbreak and instead bring intention to the wound itself. When the call comes in the night, when the diagnosis drops like a trapdoor, when the world feels wrong and logic has lost its grip, you breathe. You grieve, but you don't vanish. You remain. You respond. Not because life is fair, but because your courage no longer depends on fairness. It's not about becoming unshakable. It's about shaking without disintegrating. The Stoics were not made of marble. They lost friends. They faced exile, poverty, and execution. But they trained themselves not to dominate emotion, but to dwell with it wisely. They wept. They loved. And still they returned, again and again, to the discipline of perception, the practice of presence, the clarity of knowing what they could and could not control. Take Seneca, philosopher, statesman, Stoic, ordered to take his own life by a paranoid emperor. But his letters don't read like the writings of a broken man. They are full of light, of fire. It is not that we have a short time to live, he wrote, but that we waste much of it. For him, death wasn't an ending. It was a lens that sharpened the edge of every moment. When you let go of needing permanence, you begin to love impermanence properly. This is the strangest alchemy. The Stoic lets go and gains, stops clinging and receives, ceases demanding, and begins creating. Not in delusion, but in devotion. To live in alignment, even if the world is misaligned. To hold fast to virtue, even when the path vanishes underfoot. This is where the Stoic and the absurdist become strange siblings. Both refuse the false comforts of illusion. Both stare into the abyss and blink less often than most. But where the absurdist cries into the emptiness, the Stoic nods and gets back to work. Not because they don't feel the void, but because they've stopped trying to fill it with borrowed meaning. You might call that surrender, or call it resilience. The Stoics called it ataraxia, tranquility, not numbness, not retreat, but a luminous calm that holds sorrow and joy in the same hand, a peace that grows not from evasion, but from orientation. And here's the miracle. When you let go of needing life to make sense, you start seeing the beauty in its strangeness, the sweetness in its chaos, the tenderness in its ending. Not because life changed, but because you did. You are now someone who no longer needs meaning to live well. And because of that, you've become the kind of person whose very life begins to generate meaning. Not capital M meaning, not ultimate purpose, but the kind that flows naturally from presence, clarity, and grace. You become a quiet source of strength to others. You say less. You love more. You begin to walk lightly on the earth. Not because you've renounced everything, but because you've started to hold everything loosely. You are still going to die. You are still going to lose things you love. But now you don't flinch when the wind picks up. You have your oar. You have your mind. You have your bearings. This is not detachment in the Eastern sense, nor blind faith in providence. It is something else. Something harder. A daily practice. A radical acceptance that does not dull the will, but clarifies it. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. You laugh now, not because the absurd is gone, but because you no longer need to silence it. It lives in the corner of the room. You nod to it. It nods back. You carry on. You no longer wrestle with the gods. You walk beside them. And that might be the most radical act of all. Okay. So now you've wandered through Stoicism, stood in the ashes of absurdism, and traced your finger across the quiet pulse of meaning made, not found. You didn't get answers. You got tools. You didn't learn how to escape the void. You learned how to walk across it, light-footed, head high. Maybe that's all philosophy was ever meant to be. Not a map, but a mirror. Not a ladder, but a lamp. You've got the lamp now. Use it well. End of script. Thank you for listening, everyone.